Welcome back everyone to NASCAR Heat 2 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's video is all about Texas Motor Speedway. Texas is a track that's known for being wide open, high speeds, and great racing because of the multiple grooves. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the track itself, some lap times, and of course, setups for each of the three NASCAR series, from trucks to Xfinities, and finally to the Cup. So without further ado, let's head to the track. As always with our setup videos, I want to take a look at the track itself before we get into lap times and setup. Now the track here is fast, it's wide, it's a 1.5 mile oval, but it really feels much bigger than that, particularly compared to somewhere like Atlanta, because it is fairly wide and there are definitely multiple grooves to run here. It can be run wide open in all three series, so that's not an issue. There's only a couple of trouble spots that I'll point out, and that is basically in turns 1 and 2. The entry to turn 1 can get a little bit tight, so if you're going to have to lift somewhere in the Cup car, this would probably be it. And in fact, at the gameplay footage that you're going to see at the end of the video, where I do a 7-lap race with a maximum strength AI, that's the one thing you're going to see. I actually make a point of lifting each time I go into turn 1, just to show you that you can run great lap times and not have to worry about the fact that you're lifting a little bit. But by the same token, if you decide not to lift, it's not the end of the world either, because this track can definitely be run wide open. I just wanted to show you a little bit of variation there, and that it's not the end of the world when you do lift. So the other trouble spot would be in the center of 1 and 2, there's a bump. Now you're not going to feel it a whole lot when things are going good, but if your car gets really loose or really tight, then it's going to magnify that. For example, if you're loose going through the center of 1 and 2 and you hit that bump, then it's going to make the rear end step out even more. So keep that in mind. Also, on the late exit of turn 2, there's a few bumps there that, again, if you're loose or tight, it can magnify that. So just keep those in mind. Normally, they're not really an issue, but it's something I wanted you to be aware of before you get out on the track. Now let's talk a little bit about lap times. Lap times, for the most part here, not really an issue, again, because you're wide open or near wide open the entire time. Trucks, you can get anywhere from a 30.2 to a 30.3, pretty easy. And also, a lot of that will depend on the traffic around you. If you're by yourself, then you can run 30.3s all day long, maybe even better than that, depending on how the setup handles for you and how your entry and exit to the corners are. But again, 30.2, 30.3, anywhere in that range, and you will easily outrun the AI. The AI are no trouble in any of the three series. In fact, I qualify on the pole, and it's generally by 3 or 4 tenths of a second, maybe more. I can't remember, even on the maximum difficulty. The Xfinity cars, I'm running anywhere from a 29.4 to a 29.5, somewhere in that range. And then finally, with the Cup cars, I'm in the 28.5 to 28.6 range. In fact, the quickest lap I think you'll see on the gameplay footage is around a 28.5, maybe a 28.51 or 52, something along those lines. So again, that'll give you an idea about the lap times that you're likely to see. Let's take a quick look at the setup. Now you'll notice that we're already in the Cup car, and there's a good reason for that. Normally, I've been starting out in the trucks, and then we go and take a look at the Xfinity setup, and then finally the Cup setup. Well, in this case, all of the setups are exactly the same with one change. And we're going to talk about what that one change is in just a second when we get to it. But other than that, everything is exactly the same among the three. Now, that's not to say that you have to use the same setup among all three, but for me, it just worked out that way, and I'm actually kind of glad it did. It just simplified things for me. The way I do these is I generally start out in the trucks and try to do, the best job I can of getting a good setup there. Then I take that, transfer it over to Xfinity, and then adjust on it, and then the same thing from Xfinity to the Cup. In this case, ended up being almost identical among the three. So the shock settings are at, you can see there's 5s across the board there, and that is simply for the bumps that I mentioned in the middle of 1 and 2, and then off the exit of 2. It just helps to ride over those a little bit easier, but again, not really that big a deal. If you want to change these, increase them, shouldn't be all that much trouble. We move on to the weight settings. The left weight maxed out as always on the ovals, and then we come to the one setting that is different among all three series, and that is the nose weight or the front weight. In the Cup car, you can see I've got it at 51.0. The only difference in the three series is I actually reduced that as you get down to the Xfinity and truck. For Xfinity, I run about 50.7, 50.6, somewhere in that range, and then the trucks at about 50.5. And that is to allow the car or truck to rotate on entry and through the center without getting too loose. So because the Cup car is the least stable and the fastest of the three, I need a little bit more nose weight just to keep the stability and keep the car from getting too loose and scrubbing off too much speed. That's the reason for the difference. Now we move on to wedge, which is at 51%. Again, just to give a little bit of feel to the steering wheel and to keep the car from over-rotating too much. Front and rear ride height, I normally don't mess with a whole lot unless I have a reason to. They're at the minimums of 4 inches. Spring settings, 1100 on both front springs, 350 and 500 in the rear. The reason why I changed things up a little bit on the front is, again, just to keep the car from getting a little bit too loose on entry and scrubbing off speed. Now, when I say too loose, in this case, I don't mean like you're in a danger of wrecking. I'm simply trying to scrub off the minimum amount of speed. That's where we are with this game. And because you can run these tracks essentially wide open, you're concerned with the slightest little deviation that will scrub off a mile per hour or two. That's where we've gotten to here. So that's all I'm trying to do here. You can definitely run other combinations, including my normal 1200 left front and 1,000 pound right front, and be perfectly fine. It's just going to be a little bit more on the free side or loose side than this particular setup would be. In the rear of the car, basically the same thing. I wanted the car to be able to rotate through the corner without getting too loose, and I found that 350 and 500 in the rear gave me just that. Now the tire settings are pretty much wide open to whatever you want to do. What I tried to do was essentially give you a middle temperature that was between the inside and the outside temperatures. If you're not familiar with where you can find the tire temperatures while you're on the track, you simply hit the B button twice and that will bring those up. So anywhere in this range will get you basically proper inflation, I guess is the best way to say it. But by all means, feel free to mess around with this. If you feel like you need the car to rotate more, then simply increase the difference between the left and the right side pressures. In this case, we've got about 4.5 pounds of difference between if we look at the left sides and the right sides. Increase that up to 6, 8, 10 or more, and you'll start to see the difference. The car will definitely rotate better and start to be more free or loose. So again, keep that in mind. Moving over to the miscellaneous settings, the left and right front cambers, no change here, maxed out, no reason really not to. Front sway bar is at 1.15, and again, I've lowered that from what I had used a while back at 1.5 inches, and that's just to help the car to rotate better overall. So if the car gets a little bit too loose, try increasing that number and see what happens. Generally, that will tighten the car up, particularly on entry. If the car you feel like it's not turning well enough, then try reducing the front sway bar. Just be aware that that can be a major adjustment, so keep that in mind before making that change. Rear sway bar, I'm not using it, but again, if you need the car to rotate more, feel free to add the rear sway bar and then increase the stiffness just to get an idea of how that works for you. Track bar, 9 inches on the left, 10 inches on the right, and the 1 inch of split between the left and right is simply to help it rotate, particularly a little bit more from the center of the corner or exit. So if you're getting loose on exit, then the best thing to do probably would be to start by reducing the right side track bar. Brake bias is really not used. It's more of a personal preference thing. I normally go between 70 and 75 just for the green flag pit stops when it's time to come in, just so I have enough front brake in it that the rear end doesn't want to step out and spin out under heavy braking. But again, there's no reason to brake here under normal green flag situation. So tune this to your own personal liking. Grill tape I didn't mess with. It's not really something I'll worry about. If there's going to be anything you might want to adjust between the 3 series, maybe it's grill tape to try to push the limit. The limit in the game seems to be around 225. That's about the hottest you want to get the engine. And if you're just like with the tires, if you're not familiar with how to see the engine temperature during the race, then you can press the B button once, and that will bring up the temperature that you're looking for. Again, as long as you keep it at 225 or below, you'll be fine. If it gets much above 225, and particularly when it gets up around 230 and 235, the engine will start to smoke and you'll lose power. But essentially, I haven't found that the grill tape makes much of any difference in the game, so I generally don't worry about it. Wheel lock and steering offset are what I generally use at 10 degrees for the wheel lock and the steering offset of 0.10. The wheel lock is intended to be a way to increase the steering sensitivity. So the lower the number you use here, reducing this to 9, 8, and so on, would increase the sensitivity of the steering. And conversely, increasing this number to 11, 12, and so on would decrease the sensitivity. The reason I don't generally use that a whole lot is I don't like the feel that changing the wheel lock gives, so I tend to stay with about 10 degrees and just leave it there. Steering offset is intended to offset the pull to the left that a good fast setup will have. So one of the ways you can offset that is using this particular parameter, and the more you increase this number, the more it will offset that pull to the left and try to get the car to go roughly straight down the straightaway. The problem with using too much of this is if you use too much, then you'll reach a point where the car will actually pull to the right on the straightaways, which I don't like at all. So I generally like to keep a little bit of a pull to the left, at least, in the car. Moving on finally to our gear settings. It's hard to believe actually that I'm using the exact same gear among all three series, but again, as always, there's plenty of room to adjust here, whether you want to get closer to 9,000 RPMs or closer to 8,000 RPMs as your max RPMs. Plenty of room for adjustment there. Try out some different numbers. Who knows, you might pick up some speed by doing so. So that's going to take care of our setup. Again, remember the lap times here, 30.2 roughly for the trucks, 29.4 roughly for Xfinity, and then finally the Cups cars at about 28.5 seconds. So now, thank you very much for joining me. Stay tuned for that quick race against the maximum strength AI in the Cup cars, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat 2 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming.